Okay. Broadcasting.
Well, I'll do a brief introduction. I'll do a brief introduction, and then we can talk about whatever you all would like to speak about. It can be easy in spirituality to get the subtle idea that one is going someplace or going from normalcy to some transcendental condition, or going from normalcy to some, amazingness or some perfection that is a solution to all one's woes and so on and so forth. The actuality of spirituality is exactly the opposite. Spirituality is about coming more and more precisely into what is actual, into what normalcy actually is. So, I think that most sophisticated inquirers have become aware of this, but it can still be easy to have a sort of subliminal notion of, there's some grass that's greener on the other side of the fence over there, and that's where we're going. But, it's quite the contrary. Having said that, what this actually turns out to be is the solution to all your problems. Conveniently enough. Not by solving them, but by revealing that they are not problematic at all. Anyway, that's just a little sketchy introduction. What would you all like to chat about?
Well, I'd like to follow up on that. The grass is greener and there's really not a problem. I mean, because, and I've said this already, so I'm going to just repeat myself. So what's here is just what's here, and it's great, and there's no problem, and it's all pretty calm. There is a little smidgen of, and I know this is thought, so maybe you'll just dismiss the whole thing, I don't know. But there is this little smidgen that there is a little piece that has not been realized. The little piece being that there hasn't been the experience, the felt experience of oneness where there's, well, I don't have to describe that, that I've read about. And coming to really experience the absence of separation. So that's my little on the other side of the fence.
Okay. How many experiences do you have?
Can't count experience. It's just
what?
Because there's no delineation
Right.
with experience.
Right. There's no delineation, so.
So they're infinite.
It's infinite. But how many experiential fields are present in your experience?
There's just one.
There's just one.
And in that there are dimensions.
But yeah, but
So-called.
sure, but the dimension is separate from the one field of experience.
No.
So you have the one field of experience. What's this unity you're trying to find?
Yeah. Do make that noise again.
I can't ever make it again.
The unity. Okay, so I see that I'm tripping on thought because the unity, okay, let me just try to conceptualize that. And maybe I'm just still reading too many freaking things, even on Facebook. The unity is, or the lack thereof, is this imaginary sense that there's a body in time. Because I was just reading something about Miss Hargadata today, that there's a body in time. But that's a concept.
Yeah, okay, everything's a concept you can talk about, but what's this body and what's this time? What body are we talking about? What time are we talking about? I mean, you didn't flesh out your
Confusion.
your example there.
Oh, well,
So
I just,
there's this Agridata, and then there's this body and time.
well, he said something along the lines of when you realize that there is no body at a point in time and you are one with everything.
Right? So what's this here?
It's still the overlay. It just won't give up.
Well, there's an overlay. Is the overlay separate from the experiential field?
No,
Interesting.
come on, I'll pay you.
Dollar away.
Yeah, maybe.
What you're calling an overlay, if you look closely at it, what do you find? Where do you look for it? Where does it appear? What's it made of?
Looks like it's made of like flimsy fabric. That's like,
Okay.
it's keeping me from that green pasture on the other side of the fence.
Yeah, but where's the green pasture on the other side of the fence? Right here, right now, where is it?
No, it's just my imagination,
Sure, where's your imagination?
right here.
So you have it. Since the green pasture is only in your imagination, and since your imagination is right here, right now, welcome to the green pasture.
Wow. I better just stop reading anything.
I
Except for book when it's
would
coming out.
advise it.
Yeah.
Don't even read my book.
Well, so
Whatever
basically,
you do, don't pay for it.
it's all imagined.
It's all imagined. The simple fact, actuality alone is present. Actuality is inconceivable, absolutely inconceivable. So therefore, all conceptions are not of actuality, they're fantasy. So why pay them any attention? I mean, you can enjoy them, you can trip on them, they're kind of amusing, and we're very accustomed to playing games with them as what seems to take up the large part of our awareness. But it doesn't actually amount to anything.
So,
It never departs from the present moment, the wholeness of the present moment.
Does that mean experience then is illusionary?
No, absolutely not. Of course not. Experience is totally actual. But experience isn't experience in any sense of supposing some definition of that word that would define what this is. I sort of prefer the word actuality because it sort of indicates where it is, but not what it is.
It indicates what?
It indicates where it is, but not what it is. Experience, we have this word and it has definitions. You can look it up in the dictionary and so experience is blah, 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 blah. And so then you look at this and suppose it's blah, 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 blah. But this is not anything that can be described or imagined. It is exactly what it is. It is exactly what is present. And so the less you try and define it, the clearer and more obvious it is. And the more clearly all of the contradictory and paradoxical nuances of its nature are obvious.
Would it be true to say there are actually no qualities?
Yes, which does not negate all the qualities that are totally apparent, but since none of the qualities can be resolved as actually being anything precise, in other words, you can't get to the bottom of what anything is, so you can't find it. So we're in the very peculiar position of having an experiential field that's full of qualities, none of which can be found. Pure paradox.
can be found as something.
I mean, yeah. Well, to be a quality, it has to be found as a quality, I suppose. I mean, logically speaking, anyway. Not that this is logical.
What are you talking about when you say qualities?
Qualities is all of the apparent differentiation that appears in experience, like color and luminosity in the field of vision, frequency and volume in the field of hearing, and so on and so forth. All of these things are apparent, but then if you very precisely try to find exactly what it is that is apparent, and exactly how it is apparent, it's elusive, because all of these qualities they don't resolve into coherence in terms of exactly what they are. The more you investigate them, the more you find out, and the more information you amass, the more the information diverges from all the other information you've amassed, and so everything sort of spreads out into a smear the closer you look, which is kind of counterintuitive, because you might expect that the closer you look, things will converge into simplicity. But it seems to be the opposite of that, which is, irrational. But then this is not a rational phenomena, it's an actual phenomenon. Or nomina, if you want.
So if there's just this one experience that can be found, and then, so where's the unity that I'm looking for? There's just this one experience. To decide upon that, would all these other things, a lot of the questions that we have, like how does this work, does that stuff, it seems like it just starts to reveal itself.
Well, of course, if you look and see what's actually there, all you find is this.
Yeah.
If you look at anything that appears in experience, all you end up finding is experience itself.
Yeah.
So all of these apparent differentiations reveal themselves as not actual differentiations in the sense of something that's separate from something else.
Yeah. So then,
it's very much like in a dream. In a dream, there may seem to be all these sorts of conditions and events and environments and so on and so forth, and entities and what have you. And yet, you wake up, it was a dream, there was nothing there. Yeah. So there seems to be something there, and likewise, in this experience, there seems to be so much detail, so much, we're all familiar with the normal consensus reality interpretations of everything. The evidence for that seems to be present, but if you look very closely at exactly what is present, it's very slippery. It doesn't resolve into stability or coherence or solidity.
So then this intellectual process resolves itself. Because see, I find myself, as soon as you said that, it's so obvious. It's like, there's just this one experience that I have. So where's the unity, that I'm looking for? And in that, it's like this intellectual processes that I have are like some attempt at finding that unity, not trusting this just right here experience.
Right.
And I can't help but wonder that just in simply deciding upon that experience, that all these intellectual processes will just resolve themselves.
Of course, because as you accept that experience itself is the totality of actuality, the totality of reality, then all of these, and that it is intrinsically by its nature unresolvable and inconceivable, then all these conceptions which are based upon a pretense of resolvability obviously are invalidated, so they lose their relevance.
So this I can feel at the logical level, or even at the level of some substance, but subliminally though, it seems to be hardwired in me, this kind of separation. As in, I get what you're saying, okay, if I contemplate on it, then yes, I feel this unity, there's nothing but that. But then subliminally though, it seems that there is some kind of a hardwiring that kind of constantly seems to push out the world and
so what is separate from what? What's in terms of your immediate, your sort of a core differentiation? What seems to be separate from what for you?
for me, it's a sense of contraction, right? So basically, that I'm trapped inside this body somewhere. I mean, I can't really put my finger on it, but it seems like largely behind the eyeballs from here, and then the rest of the world is surrounding us, kind of like a geometric illusion, so to speak.
Okay, but the separation is between what is observing experience and experience?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, that's pretty easy to invalidate. I mean, if you look at your experience, there's no, when you experience, where is it experienced? It's not experienced over there somewhere and you're over here. It's experienced here in your experience. And if you look for yourself, where do you find yourself or your sense of self? Here in your experience. This here is the same here. There's not a here and a kind of a there-ish here and a more there-ish here. Here is here. I see a tree outside that window. Where do I see it? I see it here in my experience. And I feel myself, let's say, as a perceiving potency. Where do I feel that perceiving potency? Here in my experience. So, I mean, and that's not an abstraction, that's extremely concrete. You know, look where experience occurs, where perception occurs, and look where perceiver is. Perceiver is at perception. You wouldn't see it as a gap. I see you. If you're over there and I'm over here, how am I seeing you? You know, the seeing of you is the absolute intimate co-occurrence of the apparition and the perceiving potency, right? Like in a dream, you see someone sitting in a chair in a room. Where are you seeing them? Here in your experience. Where are you? Where's the dreamer that is seeing that? Here in your experience. There's no, even though there appears to be spatial geometry, you know, as an artifact of how the mind interprets the visual sensory field or what have you. If you look closely, that doesn't hold up because each of the sense fields has a different implicit geometry. So the visual field has a very obvious, left, right, up, down, and so on and so forth, and parallax and all that. So it seems to present itself as a three space. But the auditory field is a little bit different. The sense of touch is downright bizarre. It has no up or down at all. It just has this weird spatial. If you close your eyes and feel the shape of, ignore body image and just feel the shape of your feeling sense. What shape is it? You can't answer that question. It's all over the place. Imagine you had eyes in the palms of your hand. Okay, and now imagine what space would look like. Suppose I'm looking at this cup and I look at it like this and then like this. Or like this, or like this, or like this. So where would the cup appear to be? Because your eyes happen to be situated close together, it holds up a more coherent seeming projection of the parallax, of three space.
That's amazing. Because of the location of our eyes.
Well, it's more amazing than that, though. That's actually very superficial. How does space appear in a dream? You don't have two eyes in a dream. You can dream you're standing on the lip of the Grand Canyon and see this vast space, and there's someone over here to your left and someone over here to the right. Where's the space coming from? You wake up and it was like, was there any space there? I was lying in bed with my eyes closed. And here's all this space. You close your eyes and you doze off in a nap. Where'd this space go? Space appears in experience. Experience is not dependent upon space.
Does that go from locality too?
Well, sure. I mean, there are euphemisms for the same thing. The only locality is here, which means the field of your experience. So I see a cloud in the sky. Where am I seeing it? I'm seeing it here, in my experience.
So your locality is your experience.
Of course.
So in a dream, locality could be in two places or only one?
Well, there's no one or two. There's no places. Places appear because of experience, and experience is not. But place or non-place isn't a relevant category
I
of
should say
experience.
locality. Not
Yeah, locality, sure, but either one. I mean, any degree of seeming localities might appear, but they appear because of experience, not the other way around.
I've had dreams in which, like where you're at, I'd be like watching myself play cards with people.
Mhm.
Then all of a sudden, I would look up and I would see me watching me.
Mhm.
And then turned around and another me watching me. And as soon as that happened, the dream collapsed.
Sure, it can look like anything.
But the locality of perception changed in my dream.
Sure, it can look like anything, because it's arbitrary, because there is no actual locality.
There is no actual locality.
Yeah. There's no locality within the field. The field is a locality. There can be seeming locality within the field, like in your dream, but that locality was only a seeming, because the actual locality was here of the field of experience, the dreaming field in that case.
No matter how I could segregate that, there's only one locality.
Yeah, of course. Appearances notwithstanding, it can seem like anything. Well, we're very familiar with this with dreams, but we don't, it's easy to not notice that the waking condition is actually exactly the same. I mean, you're sitting here, you're talking to someone, and then your attention wanders, and you're looking out the window, and your attention wanders, and you remember something in your memory, and you're there, and then and then your attention wanders, and you feel, an itch on your butt or something, and it's like, there's all this incoherence of these little different vignettes of dimensions opening and closing within experience that don't necessarily have much of an orientation to each other in terms of any coherent spatiality or geometry or anything like that. And which is what happens in dreams. But in the waking state, where the mind is very powerful to enforce a kind of a objective framework on things. So it holds in imagination. No, this is a space that's really here, and all of this is just wandering of attention and memory and so on and so forth. Whereas the only thing that's actually present, that's the only evidence for anything, is experience, which in itself is this continual drifting and flashing and moving in and out of all these different apparent perspectives.
And I presume this can be seen.
Well, it is seen. We're seeing it right now. Attention is incoherent. Attention is absolutely unstable.
Meaning, again, that nothing is what anyone thinks it is. Is it?
Well, whatever. Forget about what people think it is. Just experience itself is unstable. You look at me, you don't look at me. You look here, and then you look here, and then you look at my eye, and then you look here, and then you look at the wall behind me, and then you think this, and then you think of something yesterday, and then blah blah. It's this cascade of flashes of whatever that the mind sort of censors most of it and pulls it together into a stall of, oh no, but I'm looking at you, even though the actuality is just all of these different
Yeah, that's about it.
But look for yourself, look precisely, look very close at your experience, and you'll notice this, the constant drifting of focus of attention. The constant drifting of the fluctuation and drifting of awareness.
Peter, is that what you mean by when you mentioned that that the unresolvability of actuality is self-verifiable?
Well,
Some words, something.
That's one aspect of it.
But when you're talking about self-verifiable, it's
So
kind
it's-
of how you were describing
Yeah,
the
it's self.
experience itself not being coherent,
Yes,
but the coherency being imposed on top by a rational mental
Yes.
model. of some
yes. Experience is self-verifyingly the way that it is,
Mhm.
and the way that it is can be described as incoherent much more accurately than it can be described as coherent. Although that gets slippery too, because there's degrees of apparent coherence and degrees of incoherence, and you try and pin that down, and that's unresolvable too. So I mean, no matter where you go, as soon as you try to say how it is, even in the broadest terms, you can't do it. You know, it's the strangest thing. It's so apparent, so clear, so completely detailed, and you cannot pin down anything about exactly how it is what it is. Very peculiar.
So what is the dynamic of suffering then?
Dynamic of suffering.
It appears that we get so identified with a train of interpretation and related emotion that we're entrapped or apparently entrapped in a story that is clearly not indicative of what is actual.
Yeah, you just
And
answered your
it's still
question.
my experience, right?
Yeah, you just answered your question. That's what it is. You know, all of these interpretations have implication. And this implication is sort of fleshes out the backstory, fleshes out the narrative. So I interpret that, okay, I'm here, I'm in a body, you're there, you're in a body. We're in a objectively existing space, you know, this, that, the other, however many details as you want. But then the implications of all that are, oh my God, what am I doing here? What are you doing here? What's our relationship? How am I supposed to handle this? Am I succeeding? Am I failing? You know, I mean, all of this, all of the personalizing of it, and then the sort of emotional implication of reaction to all of that, it gives us a typical human psychology. Whereas none of it actually exists, because all the elements that are defined into existence are done so on the mistaken notion that things can be resolved to actually be in the way they're being conceived to be, which experientially proves not to be the case.
So you have, I think, done a masterful job of guiding us through the simpler experiences of understanding and seeing, recognizing the unresolvability of relatively easy to see things, right? You recommended a process that has us kind of inching forward in our developing of the recognition that things aren't the way we think they are. And yet, we also, inevitably, most of us, on occasion, find varying degrees of emotion that are highly charged. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's anxiety, or whatever. Finding a need in the midst of that to resolve the unresolvable, so to speak.
Sure.
There's a narrative again that's keeping that emotional activity alive.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what do you recommend in the midst of those more challenging times? Sure, you're working at the simpler level too, in an effort to allow an unfolding of how actuality is literally playing.
Right.
But what about those more challenging times that inevitably show up in all of our lives, one degree or another? And here we are looking at, or hoping to engage a feeling, I believe, free of the narrative.
Yeah. Well, you do the best you can. You know, I mean, as I recommend, the path of yoga is to investigate your experience and discover for yourself that your actual experience does not correspond to what you are used to thinking of it as being. Now, as you say, it's easiest to do that where it's easy, in little things and little controlled experiments, perhaps. And as you say, so you may be going along hunky-dory, conducting these experiments and getting, oh wow, this is really interesting. You know, my actual experience is really really cool and trippy and bizarre compared to what I'm used to thinking of as being this dull, stable, coherent thing. But then, as you say, all of a sudden you're in a fight with somebody and you're pissed off and you're hurt and this, that, and the other. All this whole hurricane of reactivity occurs, and what do? Well, you do the best you can. If you're a genius yogi, you will immediately look at it and go, "Oh, this is not actually that," and bang, the whole thing falls apart. It's a house of cards. On the other hand, those of us who are not genius yogis, which is possibly the majority, will get swamped, and then you're shit out of luck, basically. So it's like, well, I've lost this battle. Yogically speaking, I'm in the deep end, and I don't know how to swim. But fortunately, sooner or later, circumstances abate and transform, and all of that will dissipate, and then you can resume with your investigations. Now, the good news is that yogic investigation, investigating the nature of experience, builds on itself. So you do these simple little experiments, and just in the course of doing them, every time you do that, it builds on your previous one, and you will be developing greater and greater skill, greater and greater sensitivity and subtlety to recognize what's actually here. And actuality trumps imagination, it trumps fantasy, it trumps inaccuracy. So in the long run, what you discover in these investigations will invalidate across the board all of your interpretations, which are the basis, as you say, for all of these implications and reactivity and the suffering that we may be going through identification, through inaccurate identification. But it may seem to take time.
Is it not also wise to be aware of the apparent fact that in my quest to resolve an emotional issue, is inherent in that is a desire to escape from it, to resist it.
Sure.
And that if that interpretation is alive and well, I'm resisting, escaping from whatever the emotional turmoil may be, inevitably I cannot engage the feeling. And yet if I understand and see in the moment, if there's a pure noticing of the tendency to escape, interpret, then there is the opening or engagement of the feeling and a pure sense that no longer is held captive by an idea, a thought.
Well, sure. I mean, perhaps, but the wanting to escape is just another harmonic of the whole edifice of interpretation, which is all inaccurate. So you can tackle that at any point. You can look at it from the point of the wanting to escape. You can look at it from the point of the reactivity. You can look at it as the point of your story that the reactivity is oriented towards, your primary interpretation of events and so on and so forth. But the fundamental point is none of it is accurate at any point of the whole chain of events, the whole shitstorm. Every stage of it is fantasy, and that's the powerful observation. And again, you may be so overwhelmed by the whole gestalt of the train wreck that may be difficult for you to see, other than some, an hopeful intellectual assertion. These thoughts are fantasies as you're sitting there furious and whatever, right? Which of course doesn't do a whole lot of good.
Just another escape.
Yeah, exactly so. So at the end of the day, there's no substitute for actually seeing it. And to see it, you have to develop the skill set to do that, the sensitivity to do that. And the best way to develop it is to actually develop it. And so you have to start where you are and work from there. And in the course, as I say, in the course of doing that, eventually your skill set will spontaneously increase, your sensitivity will increase, and it will be easier and easier for you to see through things, even when they're more complex and more habitually identified with emotions and the whole shooting match. Mm-hmm.
Peter, what's the bottom line of all these conjunctions we are doing?
What conjunction mean?
all the questions we are asking you, that, what is this and what is that?
Oh, the bottom line is that none of these elements that are being inquired about exist.
But I said,
None of the elements that are being inquired about exist. Nothing that can be said or described in words has any reality whatsoever. And fortunately, it's easy to see that if you investigate your experience directly. And so that, of course, solves all questions by eliminating the elements that they consist of. You say, what about this, that, and the other? And you see that this, that, and the other don't exist, so where did your question go? Look at your experience. Look at experience.
I thought that's what you.
I'm predictable, but I hope I'm not boring.
So, if you're ever for experience just there.
Well, that question is unanswerable.
I'm just going through.
It's unanswerable. I mean, because purpose again presupposes definability. Purpose would exist with relative to some purposelessness, or purpose would be this or that. And since there is no purposelessness to contrast with purpose, and there is no this and that could be the answer to the question, then, you ask the question, is there purpose of this? And the answer is this, which is ultimately the most satisfying answer, but it may not feel like it initially in terms of asking the question.
So nothing, experience has no meaning.
Well, it has a profound meaning, perhaps. It itself is its own meaning.
Never know what it is.
Well, you can't know what it is conceptually, but you can know what it is most powerfully and most thoroughly and intimately, directly. But it's a different kind of knowing. It's not a conceptual knowing. It's not a knowing of being able to model it or conceive of it or verbalize it. But it's a knowing, like you can know how to swim, even if you can't say how you do it. You can know how to walk, even if you can't say how you know how to do it. But that knowing is very intimate and direct and can be very complete and thorough and satisfying.
Knowing by being. Right?
Knowing by being.
Yeah, it's like we know what it is by being what it is.
Well, but being what it is sounds a little dry and abstract. It's knowing by participation. And of course, experience is fully participated in spontaneously. You can't possibly not participate in it. There's no off switch. There's no exit. There's no back door.
That's interesting. I thought about that. When I think usually of knowing or knowledge or something like that, it's something kind of almost related to intellect alone.
Yeah.
What you're talking about, knowing something, it's with your whole being. It's
yes.
With every part of you, it's a difference. It's
Yeah.
not an intellectual, just
Right. The way I put it is, there's two intelligences, and as humans, we're used to only acknowledging one of them, which is the logical intelligence, the intelligence of analysis and conceiving. But there's another intelligence, which is the intelligence of directly participating with experience. This is the intelligence of, this. That's not conceptual, but there's a profound knowing. I know an awful lot about water by doing this. I can't say what it is. I can't conceive of it, but there's a profound knowing just in the immediacy of the engagement with the experience as it is. And this irrational, non-conceptual intelligence, the intelligence of perceiving, you call it the intelligence of being, is not generally acknowledged. It's just taken for granted as an inert, a constant in the equation. Of course, I'm experiencing, but that experience is actually a very sensitive, intelligent engagement. And this is the intelligence that spirituality uses. Spirituality doesn't use the conceptual intelligence or the analytical intelligence. It uses the perceptual intelligence. And the knowing, spiritual knowing, occurs on the level of knowing what whatever is by doing this. It's a knowing through direct engagement, through immersion, through participation, rather than by abstraction, which is how the conceptual mind works.
Because I think a lot of the times we're trying to abstract
Yeah.
get it through abstraction, and we're just going in circles. And
Yeah, and that's the normal human mode. Often, I mean, most of our conducting business and so on and so forth is all this abstract and verbal and logical intelligence, which is completely impotent when it comes to the actuality of spirituality. And unfortunately, that I don't think that's pointed out very often, or not explicitly. And I think it's really of the essence. You know, it's on the level of your direct experiencing itself, your direct perception itself, that your most powerful intelligence exists, your most powerful assimilative ability exists. I mean, that's where all true learning happens, and ultimately that's where all true functioning happens.
It seems like the way we've been taught is that the point at which you know something is the point at which you can verbally describe it, which actually is the point at which you sort of kind of killed it.
Right. But departed from it, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, the things you can say about water, that was a good example for me anyway. It just, how can you say what that is?
Yeah,
really?
Like, oh, it's water, it's wet, it flows, it's reflective, it's this, it's that. But that's all these separate pieces. This is not, there's no separation here. This is a wholeness. And yet it includes all of that.
Yeah.
Instantly and obviously, and immediately, then totally.
Yeah, the entree really is just feeling.
Yeah.
Feeling.
Yeah. Experience is a felt actuality.
Which isn't rational.
It's totally not rational.
I don't think it's irrational, it's just sort of irrational.
Well, it's irrational, it's inconceivable. The important thing is it's inconceivable because of the way it is what it is. First of all, it has infinite, you can say it has infinite information density. In other words, there's no way to assimilate the totality of all the information that's present in the immediacy of experience. I mean, like I look at your face and I can't, the range of colors I see an infinity of colors that your face is. There's no way I could list them or say them. That's totally self-evident. But the abstracting intelligence wants to try to make a list, whereas to the immediate perceiving intelligence is totally obvious. So first of all, the information density is obviously you can't get a handle on it, and then also the absolute instantaneous instability of it. So whatever is being experienced in the instant is already gone and has morphed into the experience of the next instant and so on. This continual cascading, this continual slipping away of specifics into new specifics that we experience as the flow of time. The fact that whatever you're experiencing is already gone. So whatever it is actually what it was.
Yeah.
But the whole thing, the obvious actuality of that is very obvious, but as soon as you try and describe it or model it in your mind or verbalize it, it's like, you're screwed because it can't be done. It's just too weird. But in the immediate knowing, it's totally obvious.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like the big fallacy is that there's a reason that you would have to try to figure that out in some verbal way.
Yeah, well, we humans, we have a strong bias. All our lives we've been brainwashed to think that we're supposed to, have a good story, have a good description, know who we are and what we're doing, and be able to tell pretty lies or whatever.
Yeah.
And all that's very cool, but that's a game which has nothing to do with what this actually is. And spirituality is all about what this actually is.
So could what you're saying, if I understand this correctly, the logical mind is always abstracting and trying to define things.
Yeah.
Is that the key that leads to separation, the thought of separation? Because I can define this over here, define that over there. So now I'm separate from that.
Yes.
And I'm scientific about it, so I'm correct.
Yes.
So my separation is correct.
Yes.
So I keep that illusion going on.
Right.
So I generate the separation, or the need to remove it.
Right. All of that follows from defining, because defining is based upon differentiation.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I define something, that's meaningless unless it's different from everything else. If I define this cup, then I have to have a world which is not the cup,
Right.
Or else, if I say this is a cup, but the cup is everything, it's like, I mean, it's gibberish.
You have to have locality.
Yeah,
Separate area.
Yeah, it's here, it's not there.
Right.
It's a cup, it's not a cup. It's, and all of a sudden there's all this differentiation and separation, which if it was true, by implication, implies separation. But
Therefore, knowing is beyond separation.
yeah, and obviously so. Knowing of the experiential field. The experiential field is a knowing, is the knowing, and it is self-evidently inclusive.
So then would science be going backwards? And they're trying to define knowing what everything is?
Not necessarily. If they look closely enough, sooner or later they'll come to this. Sooner or later they'll come to the obvious fact that everything is experience and you can't go beyond experience. I mean, all the experience with, all of their experiments with atoms, matters, and such, all they're really looking at is phenomena in experience. Experience is what there is. Atoms exist as an artifact of experience.
Isn't there a fundamental paradox? So there's just experience, no separation. At the moment a word is uttered or anything like this, it implies separate parts of that oneness, trying to learn and move and know more about it so as to be more skillful in it.
Yeah, it implies it, but that implication is not true. It's like a hypothesis. What if this were a cup, and what if it was separate from the rest of the universe? I can play that game, but I can't make this separate from anything else in my experiential field. If this is present, the rest of my experiential field is also present. I can't lift this out of my experiential field and have my experiential field over here and this over here. I close my eyes and the entire thing, the whole shooting match disappears, not just everything but the cup or vice versa.
It's so easy to get seduced in the sense that there's this apparent talking going on, discussing, navigating this.
But the talking is going on, but if you look at what the talking is, it's just exactly what we're talking. It's discussing aspects of things which do not have actual existence in themselves in the way that they're logically defined to be, but they're not nothing. They're not negated. It's not an either or. It's not like language is true or it's all nothing. Language is actual, and in its actuality, that means it's powerful. That means it's relevant.
Peter, on the level of pure experience, are there hierarchies or gradations? Are there some experiences that are more valuable than others?
No.
Because they're learning. You learn on the level of experience. Does one person have more knowledge on that level than another person?
No, there's no hierarchy, but in terms of people are all unique and have different potentialities or proclivities or, talents and weaknesses or what have you. So on the level of people, all bets are off. So one person has a very powerful engagement on one level and is clueless on another level and so on and so forth. Not that there's actually levels, it's just a term phrase.
Yeah.
But there's no hierarchy. Any experience is the whole, is the full-on whole thing.
Yeah. So on the level of people, then you're kind of talking about the manifest. That's the way it seems, that one person is having a more powerful experience or learning things that another person is not learning.
Yeah, it can seem like that, describing it in those terms, but again, all that can be found is the observer's experience, so it collapses into that.
Yeah.
So I can observe different people doing different things, but that doesn't make them actual. They may or may not be actual, but I can't know that because all I know is my experience.
Yeah.
But seemingly, people are very distinct from each other. I think it's a profound and ubiquitous fallacy that we're all kind of more or less the same. I think on the contrary, we're all extremely different, even if we're ultimately the same.
So then is it a fallacy that people can share experience?
Yes. That doesn't mean there can't be all sorts of very profound communication and resonance, but what that actually is not what we're used to thinking of it as being. So we can have a very meaningful exchange, a very meaningful meeting of minds or whatever, a very intimate communication that is very relevant, but its relevancy to me is what it is to me, and its relevancy to you is what it is to you, and there's no way of ascertaining whether they have anything whatsoever to do with each other.
So when two people are communicating, the communication at the other dimensions would be more important than at the level of abstraction, or?
No, not necessarily, because the level of abstraction is not really a level of abstraction. It claims to be, but it isn't really. In other words, right now I'm talking about words, and we could take the words I'm saying and look at their definitions in the dictionary, and it would all seem to be abstraction, none of which is true. But all of that is not actually that. All of that is actually energy present in experience. It's sound present in experience, body, language present in experience, and so on and so forth. So the abstraction doesn't really, that abstraction is itself an abstraction, and it doesn't exist. Language is concrete.
I know, but what I was meaning was this sense of getting caught up in meaning.
Right.
So I ask you something and then you respond back, and
yeah. But there is meaning, but the meaning is not the simple meaning that the abstract logic definitions would imply. So we can have a very meaningful, relevant, pithy conversation that is profound for both of us, let's say. But the reason it is that is not because of the words we're throwing back and forth in their own terms. The reason for that cannot be said what it is. It has to do with the engagement and the fullness of what that engagement is, and what, let's say, both our energy states are or evolves as being in the course of that exchange.
Yeah, so what I was asking was, these words are not that important.
Right.
So
they're not that important, but they can be useful. They're not true, but they're not invalidated, because again, they aren't what they pretend to be.
I was just telling Nancy the other day that words, I resonate with them in a given context, like right now. And then for me to breathe life into words that have been taken out of that context seems to be a little, it seems a little artificial for me. So
I'm not sure I follow you.
So for instance, when you say, look into your experience.
Right.
Now, when you say that, sitting there, there seems to be some sense of authenticity of that invite. Right? So now it seems to settle into that experience, seems to probe into it. There's a natural sense of inquiry. But then to kind of go back home and say, hey, Peter said, look into experience. And then, like if I'm having a video and there's something that is playing in my field of experience, it's all colluding towards this invite, then that's fine. But for me to think of something like a memory and then play it out from there, it doesn't seem to reach very far.
Yeah, that's because you're orienting to a fantasy. When we sit here and talk, you're not orienting to a fantasy, you're orienting to actual presence of experience. Now it's subtle, because the fantasy you have is actually presence of experience. If you orient to the fantasy as presence of experience rather than in terms of the content of the fantasy, the abstractions, the story, then it would be powerful.
So in other words, I stay with the memory of how this unfolds, right? If I just stay with what is unfolding.
Stay with the feeling of it, rather than the concept of it. Feeling can't be conceived of. Nothing can be conceived of, but by concepts, you can turn a narration. Yesterday I was talking to Peter and he said this and I said that, and so all that can be turned to a concept, but all that concept departs from the actuality of the presence of the immediacy. Whereas the feeling, you feel, so you remember what happened yesterday, But you remember how you felt yesterday. In the remembering how you feel, you're feeling something. And that feeling is immediate, and it's not an abstraction. The narrative, the backstory is an abstraction, and hence is not powerful. Or let's say not as powerful.
And this brings a related question about satsangs in general, right? So basically, the 10 days or whatever you've been here, this has been pretty helpful. Now you go back, and then this stays on, the sense of inquiry stays on for a bit, and then it kind of dies down. So I'm kind of thrown back to this thing where they're saying that association with the wise or the satsangs is kind of pretty potent this way, that constant association, right? So basically that's something that is emphasized in the traditions. Now, is that kind of like a dependency that would later somewhere block, or is it so this kind of freedom that is felt in the moment, that itself will resolve all of that?
It could go either way. It could block if you remain oriented to the orientation. If you remain oriented to the fantasy of, oh, I need to be in this relationship in order for it to be useful or whatever. Whereas you can take advantage of what you discover in these kinds of situations, and ultimately discover that what you're discovering is in you. What you're discovering is not actually dependent upon the enactment of the situation or the apparent relationship. And so you transfer your awareness and your appreciation from what you get out of the situation to the fact that you can get that within your experience. Let's say it's inherent in your experience without needing the situation to bring it forth. Or not. I mean, a lot of people fixate on gurus and stuff and do this, get involved in all of these dependency situations, which, can essentially be stymieing. But it's not intrinsically that way. It's always a matter of intelligence. It's a matter of recognizing what's really here rather than orienting to interpretation. If you're dependent upon some teacher or some situation, you're not really dependent on them. You're dependent upon the fantasy of that relationship, which exists nowhere but in your imagination.
But I know for a fact that when I sit by myself, right, there are these moments when I tumble into this sense of intense awareness, like full mode engagement with the experience. And this seems to happen much more frequently when I'm here with the satsang, with sitting with everybody.
Well, what he's talking about is partializing, like,
no,
if this is different than that, and this is better than that.
Well, it's not partializing. There's infinite ranges of experience, but you are valuing one over another. Now, the value you find here is genuine value. The problem is that you're invalidating what you find when you're at home, which actually is just a different flavor of genuine value. Experience is the value, and experience comes in a lot more than 31 flavors, an infinity of flavors, and it can be very rich and meaningful and deep, and it can be very frivolous, and it can be very irritating, it can be anything.
Right.
And as human beings, we're experts at having preferences. Oh, I like this better than that. And our preferences are fine, but don't confuse preference with value. So I prefer drinking Earl Grey tea rather than, something else. But that doesn't mean Earl Grey tea is better. It just means I prefer it.
And that's not rational either. It's
Of course
just,
not, totally not.
It's just,
I mean, how does that happen? What is preference?
yeah.
So my orientation in this context is this way and it is fine, but I'm just giving myself the freedom to orient anyway. Is that the...
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, find what you find valuable here and compare it to what you find less valuable elsewhere. And look and really what's valuable here is true. What's less valuable elsewhere, question that, look into that, I would recommend. And also always remember the important thing is experience, not the qualities it's showing up as. You know, experience never shows up naked. It always shows up clothed in flavor, let's say, the flavor of what it feels like at the moment. And these flavors are just like, you know, just continually coming and going and changing and absolutely unstable and non-repetitive and so on and so forth. But experience itself is absolutely what it is beyond space and time. It does not change. And that is the value. Now, if you look closely at valuable experiences, I think you will find that the real value you're finding is that you're penetrating the vehicle of the flavor to the fullness of the experiencing itself. And vice versa. Then when the less valuable experience, you're oriented to the flavor and somehow stopping there and not going to the fact of experience itself. But you know, all of this even talking about it is, you know, is a lot of abstraction. The important thing is to see for yourself. And so, you know, what I recommend is always basically the same, which is feel the presence of experience, investigate your experience, look at what your experience is in any context, whether you're at home meditating or if you're here or somewhere talking to someone about this stuff or whatever, you know, look at what is present and see how what is present. Try to let it show you what it is and let it show you, as it will, that it is vastly beyond what you're interpreting it as being, what you can even possibly interpret it as being. And right away, that progressively and maybe gradually invalidates your interpretations. And it's the interpretations that cause you all your trouble. Experience does not cause you trouble. Interpretations cause trouble.
Well, it sounds like the challenge there is to let it show you what it is without yet another more subtle interpretation.
Yeah, but there's no either or. The interpretations are fine because the interpretations don't block the actual presence. So you don't need to fight interpretations. The mind's going to keep spinning out interpretations forever, and who gives a shit?
But notice that.
Notice that, sure. Notice that, but notice the fullness of experience, which vastly transcends the interpretation, which is one tiny little subset of the full field of presence.
In that sense, whether a feeling, emotion, or a thought seems to stem from a preference or a narrative.
Sure.
It doesn't matter really as far as yoga is concerned.
Right, exactly.
You just
Doesn't matter.
treat it exactly the same way. You're just looking at it closely, whether it's from a story about good or bad, or whether it is a preference of tea or coffee, doesn't matter.
Yes.
You just with it, and that's all.
Yeah. Yeah. Preferences are not a problem. They're just irrelevant. So let's say I prefer tea instead of coffee, which isn't really true, but let's just say that. Here I am with tea. I don't need to go investigate coffee. I can use tea as a perfectly good path of investigation. So I can be with the experience of being with tea, and there's an infinite potentiality for discovery there. Now, if I like coffee, there's the same potentiality for discovery there. So it's not like, again, yoga is very simple because all you need to do is investigate any experience and you find everything. It's not like you need to investigate everything serially. Well, I've investigated this, let me check it off the list. Now I have to move on to that. It's not like that.
Because we have a narrative about the narrative, or we get caught in our narratives.
Yes.
Therefore, we suffer, for example.
Yes.
That's the story. Therefore, I should be noticing the thought that comes from a narrative about me being somebody or liking something.
Yeah.
And really, you can't do anything about it any differently.
No.
Than whether it comes from a preference or whether it comes from space. Who knows where it comes from.
Yeah. The best way to handle narratives is ignore them. They're going to be going on continually, but they always occur in the presence of direct experience, which is not a narrative. You know, the light appearing in your field of vision is not a fantasy. It's not an abstraction, and so on. Everything that appears in experience in the instant is actual. And that, any of that or all of that is a doorway to discovering the nature of reality.
So sorry.
So just one thought. Kind of the way you described it, what I heard here was look at the invariant aspect of the experience, maybe. And if I put that interpretation, or is it just because are you looking at the the quality of the thoughts, whatever it is? There's a thought flowing, not the contents of it, but there's a thought flowing. You're just noticing that.
Look at when you say quality, that's a little bit of an abstraction. I would say that the experiential texture. If you want to abstract what you're looking for, look at the texture of experience. What is the texture of thought? What is the texture of light? What is the texture of sound? What is the texture of feeling? And right away, that will direct you to the immediacy of what is present. What does light feel like in consciousness? What does sound feel like in consciousness? What does thought feel like in consciousness? So you're being with the presence of the experience itself, the presence of the energy, call it that's showing up as the event, rather than what it is or what you're calling it or so on and so forth. Now, there's not a dichotomy. Don't try and suppress thought. Don't try and suppress interpretation. The mind's endlessly going to be spinning out some stories, it doesn't matter, because then that's a small event that does not actually hit in the way of direct experience at all. And of course, at the end of the day, it itself is just direct experience. So, it's like saying I can't find the forest because of all these goddamn trees in the way.
Would you say then, in the same way, ignore preferences as well? Like when you say ignore narratives.
Well, they're unimportant. Preferences occur and they don't matter. They're neither here nor there. By all means, feel free to try and pursue your preferences as much as you can. If you like to have a few beers at night, have a few beers at night, whatever, right? That's neither here nor there. But whatever you're doing, as you're pursuing your preferences, whether you're succeeding or failing in doing that, the actual experience in the instant is your opportunity for discovery. In any context, whether it's the context of engaging in preferences or not. So preferences are a non-issue.
I believe you said, don't suppress thoughts, but also you said ignore narratives.
Yeah, and when I say ignore them, I mean notice that even as a narrative is occurring, so much else is occurring that is not narrative. So you're not, ignoring the narrative sounds like it's directed to the narrative. What you do with narratives is like a bullfighter with a bull. The bullfighter doesn't need to stop the bull, all he has to do is step out of the way. So likewise, here comes a narrative interpretation, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, over here, what's in my field of vision? The narrative's right here and it's charging and it's, arguing and trying to get me pissed off or whatever. And meanwhile, here's this light. So it's a continual slipping, let yourself slip away. Don't fight anything. Let yourself slip away from it to something else. And which is easy to do because the attention is always spontaneously doing that anyway.
And it's so funny because back in the day, when that would be occurring, and the bullfight analogy is perfect. But then thought was saying, oh, that's a cop-out. Why are you, this is going on over here, these thoughts, these feelings. Why are you going over there and trying to escape? But it's just thought, just doing more of what it does. It's just, so, just noticing just how the thought is basically a babble.
Yeah. Thoughts a babble. But you don't need to suppress it or fight with it.
No, but I'm just seeing how it's a babble. It just became so much less important.
Yeah,
because I
exactly.
I believed, I must be trying to cop out because I'm trying to but just seeing all of that thought.
My favorite metaphor for thought is like your crazy grandmother who's in the back room of the house yelling and screaming about some inanity that she happens to be hallucinating. And so she's busy yelling and screaming about something, but it's just not about anything. So the yelling and screaming goes on continuously, but it doesn't have anything to do with anything. So you go about your business.
Yeah.
So there's no significance to the thought.
No, I wouldn't say that. Thought is significant in the sense that any actuality is significant. It's a aspect of the holographic presentation of the meaningfulness of the totality. So anything that appears in your experience is meaningful as, let's say a point of engagement with the current panorama of meaningfulness that reality is. And a thought is just another apparition at the end of the day. So, but our normal absorption with thought as with our narratives as the be all and end all and the canon of reality is irrelevant.
Yeah. So
but it's not completely irrelevant, like I say. I mean, anything that's actually present is truly and powerfully relevant as an avatar of presence itself.
Yeah. But so if we're in this movie, essentially, we don't have to figure out the movie.
Right.
We can just kind of ignore the movie and eat popcorn and
Kind of.
to the other people.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, because the movie, you're not going to be able to make sense of the movie. It's about the being in it that is the meaningfulness.
Yeah.
I mean, you can sort of couch it in terms of enjoyment or participation or whatever,
So talking about the movie, are these separate people in the actually here? Or
Hey,
I don't know. I don't know.
Huh?
I don't know. I can't verify that. As far as I know, I'm the only one here.
But I love how you
I don't know that you're not here, but I certainly don't know that you are. I sort of assume you may be. But on the other hand, I could be dreaming. How could I know? But that doesn't affect the quality of exchanging with you and hanging out with you at all. It's still interesting and meaningful and potentially beautiful, just like when you're with someone in a dream. It can be, you have a great time, or not.
could you give something to work with the need for stimulation?
Well, I mean, that's fine. You want stimulation, you got it, fortunately. The experiential field is always completely full. You want stimulation, you come to the right place. And then if you talk about particular stimulation, we're getting into preferences again, and then you're free to pursue that all you want. That's neither here nor there. It doesn't matter.
So for instance, my addiction to caffeine,
Right.
basically cheap pump caffeine, my chai.
Oh,
So I basically just pump myself up so much that I'm kind of like really buzzed out in my head.
Sure.
And it seems like as if I can't stop till I get there, and then I'm like kind of wondering what the heck did I come down here.
Right.
So it's that kind of a dual thing where on the one hand, where I'm not there, I kind of want it.
Right.
And then I reach there and then I'm saying like, hey, I was seen before. Why did I pump myself with this?
Yeah, but that's fine, but that's not really, that's not relevant for yoga. It doesn't matter one way or the other.
It matters for my job.
Huh?
It matters to my work.
Yeah, and that's fine. If it matters to your work, then you either correct it or you get fired. And either of those is a viable scenario.
It seems like, on the stimulation question, this relational thing, it seems like the tendency to move away from experience often starts with a subtle sense of boredom or subtle sense of boredom.
Boredom, yes.
Just
Yes.
Very subtle, it's not.
Yes,
like,
yes,
oh,
yes.
oh my God, something, it's just very subtle, and then
Yes,
you find yourself drifting,
yes,
right? And from here into story, into, whatever.
yeah,
So that is noticed,
yes.
right? But I guess the answer to everything is just notice, but
Well,
I'm just, because, so the stimulation question, like, that need for
Yeah.
that
Boredom,
need arising at the level of
yes.
feeling for something different.
boredom is a really interesting thing. What boredom consists of is an interpretation. When you're bored, you're interpreting. You think you know what's going on, and you don't think very much of it. You don't think it's very good. But the fallacy is that you think you know what's going on. So that's, you can undermine boredom on the level of, again, looking at your actual experience, and you'll notice, wow, there's an awful lot going on, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't know if I like it or not. It's just too weird and complex and slippery for me to even answer those questions. And so you're just in this bombardment of information, and there's no possibility to find it boring, because what would that even mean? So to turn that into boring, you have to say, God, here I am in this stupid talk and it's going on, and I'm not interested, and I'd much rather be out, whatever. But you have to take this scintillating event and turn that into a stupid talk in order to have that thought. That way, first, there's another interpretation. I snuck in, but for levity.
Yeah, but often, by the time you notice, you're already in the story.
Of course.
And then I guess, but
that's how it always.
You just come back.
That's how it always is with concepts. When the cycle of yoga is you're carried away by concepts, and then sooner or later you notice direct experience, and then you're carried away by concepts. That's the cycle. Then you notice direct experience, and you're carried away by concepts. The cycle, the wheel just keeps on turning. But the noticing direct experience trumps the concepts, because noticing direct experience is actual, which gives it power, the authority of actually existing, whereas the being carried away by concepts is mere fantasy, so it's much weaker by comparison. This is why yoga works, even though you spend most of your time being distracted, inevitably, unless you're a super yogi, perhaps.
I have a tendency to mix up my direct experience and my interpretation all the time.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah, right. I take this is wrong, this is bad, this is fucked, I'm hurting, I'm suffering, and I call it my direct experience. Right. As opposed to recognizing it for the interpretation of what's going on.
Right.
And eventually, sometimes I'll get around to noticing that's the case.
Right.
But it takes a while.
Right.
Any thoughts on the best way to have a good clean look at the difference between the two?
Well, yes. It's of the essence to learn to discriminate between actual experience and interpretation. And what comes to this over time, and failing to do so is what we can call being lost in interpretations. You're not actually lost in interpretations, you're just confusing interpretations with actuality and smearing them together, right, and assuming they're all the same thing.
Right.
But the difference between the two is very clear cut. Anything that can seem to be specific, seem to be a certain way, is an interpretation and hence a fantasy. Because direct experience is open-ended. It does not collapse down to being clear-cut, a certain thing or a certain way or anything. It's always a smear. It's always guesswork. It's always, is this good or bad? I don't know. Does it make sense or not? I don't know. Why am I here? I don't know. Whereas the narrative is, oh, this is bad. It's terrible. This is a lot of bullshit, and I want to go here because of this and because of that. And you have all of these steps that are this, that, and this, and you line them up. You line up your ducks, and there's your argument. But there are no ducks. In actuality, there's just a smear of question marks, rich with qualities, but the qualities don't gather together into nice clean clumps that can be designated as actually being a certain way. So everything is like, I don't know. So that's the difference. So basically anything that seems to be a certain way, that seems to actually be something, especially something that's sayable or thinkable, is a fantasy.
And the odds are pretty good that that's an interpretation.
Yeah.
Right. All right, I love that. Anything, seems too true to me. Okay.
Yeah, if it's precise, if it's specific, it's an interpretation.
Yeah.
Because the actual specific is a specific of imprecision. In other words, you're looking at me and you're seeing specifically what I look like, but there's no way you can say what that is.
There's no way.
And yet, here it is, specific couldn't possibly be more specific. So in actuality, specifics reveal infinity. Specifics reveal unresolvability. In interpretation, specifics seem to reveal coherence, seem to reveal resolution, seem to be reveal resolvability. This is this and that's that.
What intrinsic learned quality then can you achieve from an experience?
I'm sorry?
What intrinsic learned quality can you gain from an experience?
The way it is what it is. And the way that being what it is, the way that it is, invalidates your conceptions of it. So direct experience, basically the power of discovering direct experience and training yourself in it, the sole power of it is to invalidate your interpretations which are inaccurate.
So there is no learned experience?
Well, all experience is learned, you could say.
So, but what's the value of it then?
The value is that it invalidates conceptions. Strategically, that's the value of it. The intrinsic value of it is what it is, which is infinitely valuable. It's the value of life. What's the value of life is this. You can't say, but it's not that kind of critter. It's not something that is coherent in a specific thing. But that doesn't mean it's meaningless, just because you can't abstract a meaning out of it. Life is profoundly meaningful, but you can't say what or why or what the meaning is. It's a lusciousness, it's a richness, it's a vitality, it's a juiciness, none of which collapses nicely into a narrative.
So is the pathway to experience or to experiencing what are you saying, experiencing not reality, but actuality?
Mm-hmm.
Is that through our senses?
Sure, senses are one of the easiest ways to go there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anywhere in experience, the presence of any actual real-time experience is sufficient. But since the senses seem to dominate so much of that, and since the senses are so obviously actual and obviously non-conceptual, they're a really safe place, they're a really safe field of engagement.
Are there other ways besides the senses?
Sure, well, anything. You can look at thought itself, but don't look at thought as the thoughts, as the story, as the presence of thinking. When you're thinking, how do you know you're thinking? That means something is present. What is it that's present? Just like when you're seeing, you don't, so I'm seeing a room with people in chairs, I could say, but I'm really seeing the presence of light. So by analogy, I'm thinking of this, that, and the other, but I'm really seeing the presence of thought, which is the substance of thought rather than the content. Likewise, light is the substance of vision rather than the interpreted content. So you can look anywhere in experience, but look at the substance of what it is. What is it that's actually present, and how is it present, rather than jumping off into interpretation. But anywhere with an experience. But the senses are nice just because we're so used to directing so much of our attention to them. I'd say it's pretty easy to do. You can direct attention to, it can be very powerful and useful, but probably more challenging for most people to direct attention to the kind of amorphous experience you have, like when you're drifting off to sleep, where you've lost the objective world, but there's still sort of presence. You can't say of what, but it's present. That can be a really fruitful area of investigation, for example. But again, for most people, that's liable to be more challenging. So you might be best just to concentrate on the senses. And there's no hierarchy. It's not like what you find in the senses is kindergarten, and then you have to graduate to something else. The nice thing about actuality is it's always full on everywhere it is. So, you know, noticing actuality is very easy. Do it where it's easy, and you get the whole shooting match right there. So you don't get brownie points for doing where it's hard. You know, it's not a thing of showing off. It's like,
Yeah.
well, I can get it easily over here, so why not?
So what's the difference? So I was just reading this text from like Krishnamurti interacting with a soldier, with a person who has some problems with his lust. And so Krishnamurti kind of starts off saying, like, first off, notice that love is not sensuous enticement and one of the things. And then the other day you were talking about how seductive this lusciousness is.
Mhm.
And so in what ways do these kind of differ? Like,
What differs from what? I'm not sure.
Sensuous enticement
Right.
from the seductive lusciousness that you spoke of.
No difference at all.
Okay, so then why, like, I mean, because Krishnamurti there was kind of asking him to be clear about what he was feeling, as in, he said he has trouble with his lust, and that's where.
How can you have trouble with lust? What's the trouble? Not enough? No willing situations? You know, these kinds of things are just different modes of experience. You know, and the important thing is, what is the experience itself? So if lust is appearing, the interesting thing is not whether or not it's lust or what to do about it. The interesting thing is, what is it that's appearing? How is it appearing? You know, if thought's appearing, the interesting thing is not what's being thought, but what is it that's appearing? How is it appearing? You know, if vision is appearing, the interesting thing is not what you're seeing. Interesting thing is what's appearing, how's it appearing? What is this experience? I mean, there's one overarching root question. What is experience? And to answer that question, look anywhere, because anywhere you look, you're looking at an experience. But look at the experience, don't look at, you know, what is being experienced, all of which is imaginary. Because the only thing that's actually here is your experience. And the what is always a fantasy and doesn't actually exist as such. So if you're experiencing lust, the interesting thing is, okay, cool, what's that experience?
So what else is there beside the fantasy?
Actuality.
No, I meant, is that the mode of inquiry? Like, okay, so there is this fantasy, whatever.
Well, what is it based on? What does it consist of? What is it that's actually present that is the basis for the fantasy, or that the fantasy is made of? So I can have a fantasy about this cup, but there has to be a cup for me to have a fantasy about it. So what is this that's here? So, I mean, it's very simple. What is direct experience? Remember, I started talking today about it's easy to think that spirituality is about going to some abstraction or some never land or some, you know, higher, better, more luminous place. Spirituality is about coming exactly into this actuality, this normalcy right here, just as it is. And so what is it? What is it that's here? What is it that's here? It's always the inquiry. And abstraction wants to spin off. Mm-hmm. It always wants to spin off into elaboration and stories, but this is here. What is it that's here? You know.
Why is it that just looking at experience, or abiding experiences can be so transformative?
Because of the nature of what it is. It's transformative relatively to what you're used to identifying with, which is a paltry, pale version of it. I mean, so it's so diminished from what it actually is that the transformation comes subjectively from being able to feel what is actually here rather than your poor stick figure version of it that you're used to imagining that you are. Interpretation is basically censorship. Interpretation oversimplifies, and so it discards vast amounts of information, vast amounts of quality. So an experience, let's say experience of something, ignore the fact of what a thing is. Experience of something, there's this barrage of richness. And to interpret it, you have to kind of ignore most of that and concentrate on a few isolated features and then collapse the whole thing into being those features. It's just like reading a caricature. An artist who's a caricature artist doesn't take a snapshot of you. He notices, oh, you have a big nose and your Adam's apple sticks out. So he draws an exaggerated nose and an Adam's apple and says, see, that's you. But it's not you. You are, can't say what you are. You're the whole, you're too much. There's too much there. And so we hypnotically, we live in this world that we imagine. But I think I'm Peter Brown. I think I'm a human being. I think I have this body. I think I'm 68 years old. I think I grew up here, and such happened to me. All of that is like stick figures. What I really am is vast and rich and luscious and inconceivable. Not as an abstraction or some long ago and far away, but right here, right now, that's what's really here. And these stick figures are not here. They're not here. They're only imagined into existence.
I think we try to interpret it so maybe you can capture it.
Exactly. We want to capture it. It can't be captured. So we don't end up capturing it. We end up capturing a very stupid, pathetic, ridiculous version of it.
Like when you are in the mountains or something and you take a picture and you think it's going to look like what you were experiencing, and the picture is just like nothing.
Or what's worse, you're in the mountains and you draw the mountain and you go, bloop, bloop. Look, here's the mountain now. Here's where I was. That's what it looks like. It's like, really? Or a little, or a 2-year-old will draw, a stick figure like this and then that and this and a circle on top and say, look, that's mommy. It's like, well, not really. Mommy's a little more going on than that. It sounds ridiculous, but this is how ridiculous interpretations are, concepts are. They're pathetic, they're small. So when you notice what's actually here in experience, then you get to participate in that. You get to feel that richness that you are. You're no longer cut off from it by the sort of hypnotic properties of mind that orient to these pathetic stick figures and thinks that's what's really going on. I mean, no wonder people think life is horrible, because the stick figure version of it is. It sucks. It's pathetic. It's anemic. Whereas experience itself is just, it's full on, it's vital, it's rich, it's safe, it's complete. And of course, when you notice that, it becomes obvious, and you have to participate in that. You have to feel it as that, because it is that. And you feel yourself as that, because you are that, and so on and so forth.
I love how you said safe, because there are so many people that I'm familiar with who, right here, right now, still feel unsafe because of what happened now in their imagination 30 some odd years ago. So that's just...
Yeah, but you look right here, experience is safe because it can't be damaged. Experience can't be damaged.
And that includes everything. That includes,
Objects can be damaged, but objects are nothing but experience at the end of the day. Before this cup existed, there was experience. This cup is here, there's experience. After this cup is torn up and thrown away and burned, there's experience. Experience is not damaged. and there's nothing here but experience. There is no cup.
Anything to be said about the way language, interpretation, all of which is not true, real, direct experience, whatever.
Right.
One side. How without it, I mean, how with it, we create new things, new activity,
Right.
which feeds into experience.
Yes.
And how that just keeps feeding. And I know experience probably doesn't change, doesn't evolve.
Right.
How it's necessary.
Well, it may or may not be necessary, but it occurs.
Because there wasn't anything to experience.
I'm not sure I completely follow you, but.
Yeah. There's a cycle, you know. So it's
Well,
quickly.
abstraction participates in creation. So, you know, if you want to go build a bridge, a whole team of engineers get together and they measure things and they write things down and they get out their computers and they're crunching numbers and they're figuring things out, and all of this enormous amount of abstraction happens, and eventually, you know, a few years down and $2 million later, there's actually a team of workers pouring concrete and building a damn bridge. So I can say, well, all that abstraction built the bridge, but it didn't. The abstraction may have seeming to be occurring, but what was actually occurring was the experience and intelligence of the participators who were doing the abstracting, and it's that built the bridge. You know, it doesn't exclude the abstraction, but the abstraction isn't actually a cause of anything. It's more like, a side effect.
And that seems to speak to the whole notion of cause and effect. Isn't cause and effect, or the belief in that, just an abstraction?
Sure, first. It's a theory. Cause and effect is a theory.
So ultimately, what's here now is here now, free of any apparent past that caused this.
Well, you can't tell. You have the theory of cause and effect, but the direct experience is that in the instant, everything appears completely. And that's always the case. So you don't ever actually see any interaction.
Any interaction would suggest then that this thought that's based on memory or some imagination was the prior cause at this moment.
Right, and you can't demonstrate that it isn't that, but you can see that what's actually going on is completely beyond that.
Yeah.
In other words, that may be an aspect of what's happening, but what it's actually happening is inconceivably more nonlinear than that.
Well, all cause is an effect anyway, so it
Sure.
doesn't matter.
Sure.
So going back to the idea of experience being safe,
Yes.
in the situation where your being is being destroyed,
Right.
wouldn't that experience feel unsafe? Or
Well,
that's
your being cannot be destroyed. Your body can be destroyed.
Well, I guess, yeah, so if my body is my ability to experience
Well-
my senses or whatever, then if that's being destroyed,
Well, your senses can be destroyed. Your body can be destroyed, but can you be destroyed? Well, we'll find out. But I would say you're going to find out no. You know, I could go blind. I wouldn't be able to see. Would my experience stop? Would my visual field be any less full? I mean, that's an interesting question. You know, I close my eyes, the visual field is still full of light. I'm not seeing the so-called objective world, but there's a full field of light present, just like there is when my eyes are open. It's delineated differently, and it's more subtle flickerings and what have you, but it's still full of light. And at night, when I'm dreaming, I can dream all sorts of lights and situations, and I don't even have any eyes. I can even dream that I have eyes. Maybe we're dreaming we have a body right now, who knows?
What about deep sleep or anesthesia?
Sure, what about it?
Well, it's kind of an absence of experience.
No, it's not.
It's not, no, I was just gonna
No,
say,
it's
I've had a
not.
lot
It's
of,
a very subtle experience, but it's not an absence of experience.
I would even say it's pleasurable. There's
It's
a,
totally
there's a
pleasurable.
pleasure to it.
I
and
love it.
But there's
The
no way
hospitals,
to get.
the hospitals have all the best drugs, I'm telling you.
I just,
They're holding out on us.
I was just under anesthesia, and it was very nice going in.
Uh-huh.
And it was like really interesting coming out because it seemed like I was in mid-sentence. And I kind of picked up where I left off as I came out. But, you know, then I was told that, you know, I was under, not for very long, it was just a little day thing, but, you know, for 15 minutes or something like that, that all this stuff happened to me. And there was nothing there that registered, you know, nothing registered that.
Sure.
So,
You go to sleep and you don't register anything either.
right. So if I was like, once I die, or this body is gone, I guess I just can't imagine how I'm here, you know. Or,
No, but experience.
But your body won't be here. But when you say I'm here, what are you referring to as I?
well, or that there's here-ness, or there's anything. I can't, it seems like it's all, it's all of this experience. I mean, all that I grasp, it's just this and that, but in the absence of a physiology, I don't know.
How
I
you
mean, it's
experience.
almost like it's like I'm born into awareness, but where,
The physiology appears in experience.
right,
Experience doesn't appear in the physiology.
yeah,
Physiology comes and goes every time you go to sleep, every time you get anesthetized,
yeah.
every time you die.
But there is no, then there's no experience. And so how
When
is,
you say there's no experience, what do you mean by that? It's not true, there's no experience.
What we're wanting to
It
understand.
may not be an experience that looks like this. What's experience looks like when you're in deep sleep? It looks like something.
well,
it may be
doesn't
very,
to me
very
when I'm
subtle.
in deep sleep.
Huh?
It doesn't seem like it does while I'm in deep sleep. And when I come out of deep sleep, then there's like this, you know, there's like, oh, I slept well or something like that.
Sure, but that's looking at it from the waking perspective.
Yeah.
What's it look like from its own perspective of
Well,
deep sleep?
that's just it. I don't know.
Right, but you don't, but you do, the part of you that's sleeping does know. That's not the part of you that's talking now, which is your waking self, which is what you're identifying with. But you don't need to identify with your waking self, you can identify with experience, and then all of these different dimensions of your experience are available to you.
So is that something like a memory of me sleeping, and that memory is not accessible when I'm in the awakened state?
Right.
But it's the same memory that tells me next day at 8:30 or whatever in the night, hey, this is pleasurable, do it again. Is that kind of like something that has its own life that is not normally accessible during my waking hours, but it's like kind of when I feel sleepy or whatever, and then that kind of kicks in at some other level?
Sure, but it's not necessarily dependent upon memory. It's dependent upon the knowledge, the certainty that it is pleasurable.
I'd like,
Sorry. Yeah.
I'd like to, I'm still back with that question about in the absence of body, what's the vehicle?
There is no absence of body. This
What's
is the
the
absence of
vehicle?
body. What's the vehicle now? This is absence of body. Body is appearing.
So the
What does
sense,
the absence of body mean?
all right, so then, pardon my words. So the senses of, sight, sound, vision, blah, blah, blah. It seems that something is needed to be able to perceive those experiences.
Seems. You just said seems. When you're dreaming, how do you see light?
Oh dear, here we go again. So I'm kind of getting the sense that the whole notion of body, well,
Body is an abstraction. Experience is concrete, body is abstraction.
so then there's no difference then from waking state, dreaming, or what we so-called death. Is what I'm gathering, what you're saying.
Yes, that's true.
Oh,
But you'll find that out for yourself, so you don't need to take my word for it.
Would another way of describing this be, as you've been talking much today about seeing what anything is, in the midst of engaging actuality, is that not the same as deep sleep or death?
Of course, of
And
course.
so there's a total relinquishing of the body in the moment.
Of course.
And therefore, we kind of know
Of
through
course.
our own direct experience that
Yeah.
we're as dead now as we'll ever be.
Exactly. Yeah, this is what death looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, it might not look like it.
Yeah.
You know, it looks like, this is what death looks like when you're deep asleep. That's what death looks like. When you're dreaming, this is what death looks like.
Oh, my.
Death is a fantasy. Death is a concept.
Yeah.
All there is this, which is as it is, and you can look at what it is because here it is. And if you look at it what it is, you'll discover that it is independent of being any particular way, even though apparent beings, seemings of being all sorts of particular ways seem to appear in it, but none of these seemings resolve to actually being a particular way.
So when we say you'll find out, actually, the finding out is right now.
Absolutely. The finding out's whenever you find out. Maybe you're clueless enough that when you die, you won't even find out.
So basically, there's more senses than bodily senses.
Well, there are no senses, there's only
Right.
sense, there's only
Right,
experience.
sense, But we look at it as the body being the
Yeah.
center of everything.
Yeah.
Really, the senses are beyond the body's awareness.
Yeah, sure. The senses are an abstraction. It's imagining separate portions of the experiential field as actually being discrete from each other, but they're just a continuum. It's an inclusive continuum, like a spectrum.
It seems like with deep sleep or anesthetic, what is confounding is that it's such a profound, like, erosion of a sense of self, of a me.
Well,
And that's why it's so subtle.
of the conscious sense of self, which
That's- yeah.
we're used to identifying with.
Yeah.
We're used to identifying ourselves with the waking self, the me that is awake and seemingly inhabits this body, that can move these hands and all that.
Mhm.
But that's a very partialized
Yeah.
and specialized aspect of me. The actual me is the simply presence of being, within which the waking me appears, and or the dream me's appear, and or the deep sleep non-me me's appear.
Mhm. Yeah. But that deep sleep and anesthesia state is not nothing.
No, it's not nothing. Nothing is nothing.
Yeah.
Or everything is nothing. I mean, everything is what it is, and what it is what this is right here, right now, always. The quality of right here, right now is always the same. The actual quality of right here, right now is the same right now as if you're in deep anesthesia or dead. It'll look different. But again, how it doesn't look any particular way. I say, oh, but this looks the way it looks. That's meaningless. I say, oh, this looks like a room with people sitting in it, but it doesn't really. It looks like unresolvability. When you're in anesthesia, what's it look like? Unresolvability. When you recognize unresolvability, you discover the common denominator of apparition. That may be a good note to quit on. Thank you all for joining me. It's been lovely to see you.
Thank you, Peter. Peter, is that hat for